everyone, myself Pritili, a trainer of Modak Academy. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar on the thought-provoking topic, Carvakas in Indian knowledge system, relevance in the modern scientific age. This session invites us to revisit the materialist philosophy of the Carvakas and explore its striking connection with contemporary scientific thinking and rational inquiry. We are honored to have with us our esteemed speaker, Dr. Papia Mitra. Dr. Mitra is an eminent academician and researcher in the fields of English studies. She completed her graduation and post-graduation in English from Jadavpur University and was awarded her PhD from Ravindra Bharati University. Her doctoral research titled Two Views of Man, Augustan and Modern, Pop's an essay on man and the contemporary existentialist absurdist viewpoint highlights a deep engagement with both classical and modern philosophical thought. Dr. Mitra further broadened her academic horizon by earning a graduate diploma in arts in the academic studies of religion from Victoria University, Wellington and New Zealand. With over 26 years of rich teaching experience, she is currently serving as an associate professor in the Department of English at Surendranath College for Women. She is presently the chief editor of two esteemed peer-reviewed journals, International Journal of Culture Studies and Social Science and Theatre International, both of which were previously listed under UGC care. She also served as the president of the Tagore Gandhi Institute of Cultural Studies and Service, an organization devoted to cultural research and publication, and leads Bongo Nari Shakti, an NGO dedicated to women's empowerment. Dr. Mitra is the author of two significant works, Existentialism, A Reader's Guide, and William Golding, Lords of the Flies, and A Critical Guide. Her research interests span English literature, gender studies, religion, philosophy, and culture, with a special focus on Hindu scripture and epics. She has presented and published numerous papers and in international and national conference and reputed journal, including Springer International. We are truly honored to have Dr. Papia Mitra with us today. I warmly welcome her and invite her to share her valuable insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction. Okay. Shall I begin?
Yes.
Okay, as you have already stated, the title of my paper, the talk I want to present today is about Carvakas, particularly Carvakas in IKS, that is Indian knowledge system, and how they are relevant in this modern scientific age. But today, Indian knowledge system, it is all the rage in our education system. We all know that. It has been officially defined by the Ministry of Education as Gyan, Vigyan and Jivan Darshan, that have evolved out of experience, observation, experimentation and rigorous analysis. The focus is always on the plural perspectives that can enrich our mind and lead to Vikashito Bharat. However, I feel that one perspective that has not been given proper attention or proper eminence is that of the Carvaka school. But it is true that they have been regularly included in every syllabus before the NEP came about or IKS, and they have not been left out in the new philosophy curriculum either. Since IKS means all indigenous Indian systems of thought, Carvaka certainly belongs there. But I feel that more attention should be focused on them as they are the most scientific oriented systems of thought in Bharatvarsha. Now, I know there is a general belief that all Carvakas wanted was a hedonistic lifestyle, and the most quoted sloka attributed to them is that Jabot jibet shukhong jibet ritang kritta gritang pibet. That live, as long as you live, enjoy life, even get into debt to drink ghee. But this simplistic presentation leaves out the arguments that their actual philosophy makes. It is true that we have not been able to gather very much because we have get them mostly from their opponents. But the reason I consider them to be a crucial IKS resource is because of their scientific analysis of the world and how it mirrors modern science today. I think many of you are not in the philosophical studies, so I think a brief introduction about this school should suffice. That what are they exactly? They are the Charvakas, also called Lokayakas. Now, the term Charvaka is said either to come from the name of the founder or the people who speak of charu or sweet things. And Lokayata is said to come from the fact that it is something prevalent among ordinary people. Lokeshu ayata lokayata. Mane Buddhagashu, the philosopher, suggests that it means that of which the basis is the material world, while Monibhadra, the Jaina philosopher, says it implies totality of material existence. The connotation of this term is, however, always this worldly. Now, we do not know the exact origins of Charvaka, even though, according to mythology, it was supposedly started by Brihaspati, who is the Deva Guru. We actually do not know that, who this Brihaspati is, but one problem is that, as I have stated before, there are no extant manuscripts of their writings. We have their arguments, but as offered by their opponents as Purvapakha, and summaries in anthologies and plays, and a few quotations from a text that is called Brihaspati Sutra. However, we do know that Charvakas are not something alien that suddenly popped up in a very religious ecosystem. From the very beginning of our civilization, there has been people who had been very skeptical and rational minded as any modern scientist, since such qualities are not time bound. For example, can you see the writing?
Yes, yes.
In the Rig Veda itself, we have this kind of argument that bring lovely praise to Indra, vying with one another truthful praise. The sage Nemi says, Indra is not whoever saw him, who is he that we should praise him? In other words, this skeptical questioning mind was already there. And it is among from such schools that we have the emergence of Charvakas. Now, our thinkers have naturally debated on the nature of existence, on the nature of consciousness and the soul. And the various Indic schools, they have a common presumption of the Paramatma or the supreme consciousness, and that the goal of human life is to seek liberation from this worldly life of bondage to become one with Paramatma. But the Charvakas alone denied that this material world is a cause of bondage or there is anything beyond it. Mane Madhavacharya describes Charvakas as Nastika Shiromani or prestigeme of the atheists. Because what this epithet implies is that they are not merely atheists, but they went even beyond the Jainas and Buddhists, because they denied everything connected with whatever cannot be perceived by the senses, including all assertions of anything to do with the Paraloka or the other world, and they were wholly materialistic. Now, what is interesting is the congruence with the scientific principles that underlie our understanding of the world today, the way they present it. Charvakas argue that sense perception is the only valid evidence. This fits in with modern science that relies on observation and experiment. However, this does not mean that inference is rejected. Kamalashila, the Buddhist philosopher, informs us that Purandara, who is apparently a Charvaka, stated that they were prepared to accept it as a valid, an inference as valid when it arose from perception, when it is, in the words, loko prasiddha anumana. That is, inference is the common worldly way, but not that inference which is produced by transcending this worldly way. By loko prasiddha anumana, the Charvakas mean an inference that results from perceived things to objects that also belong to this world. For example, the famous, the smoke, if there is smoke, there is fire, because we have seen it before. that smoke is coming from fire. Now, but inference from the material world to the imperceptible world cannot be considered valid. This aligns with how science regards inference. Theories must be tested against observation, and even widely accepted theories must be tested repeatedly. Now, you see, one misunderstanding of the Charvakas I found is that the belief that they rejected inference altogether. And so the modern scientific research, which uses inference in case of model statistics and computer simulations, would be impossible for them. But actually, the most sophisticated type of Charvakas maintain there are two types of inferences. The first is inference about something which is already known and the knowledge which can be acquired by oneself, like inferring fire from smoke. The second type is inference about the knowledge of something which did not exist but is acquired from someone else, as with the existence of gods. While the first kind of inference is proper and useful, the reasoning mind could not agree to the second kind of inference automatically. Why? Because perception is held to be superior to inference, and pure inference cannot be considered to be a valid source of knowledge. Similarly, nothing can be accepted as truth merely because someone in authority says so. Whoever is in authority, they must be proved their words. This is exactly the scientific position. The second argument is that only the material world exists. The four elements of fire, water, air, and earth are the only reality, and nothing exists outside them. All life is a combination of those elements, and on death they dissolve back to those elements. Consciousness too is a property of the body and does not survive death. Now, obviously, we know now that the idea of the four material elements, they are mistaken. But at that time, the Charvakas did not have any other scientific way of knowing it. Now, in Indian philosophy, we must understand that the body has never been ignored. After all, it houses the Atman, and Kama has always been important in the sense of satisfying different worldly pleasures and desires. And it is our body that can obstruct or smoothen the journey of the soul to its ultimate end. Nevertheless, the body is less important since it is mortal, while the Atman is not. The Atman is separable from the body, and it gets reincarnated into a new body. But therefore, this is something all schools, philosophies that have risen in India can agree with, in whatever else they might disagree. So when Krishna declares the Dehi, that is the embodied person, experiences childhood, youth, old age in the body, and also the passing away of the body. But wise people are not moved by this, because the Atman is eternal. The Hindu Astikas, the Buddhist and Jaina Nastikas, everyone can agree with it. Charvakas, however, object to any entity or state of being that cannot be perceived but must be accepted on faith alone. For them, consciousness is a property of the body. The body is the only existent Atman, and the self ceases to exist when the body perishes. Now, in Buddhist philosophies, there is a comparison with the recluse who has gained proper understanding. They create that another subtle body, pulling it from its gross material body, as if drawing a sword from its cupboard. However, but Charvakas reject it. Such a comparison, arguing that it lacks sufficient verification. That as a man draws a sword from the scabbard and shows it to you, saying, "Friend, this is the sword, this is the scabbard." So nobody can draw the soul from the body and show it to you, saying, "Friend, this is the soul and that is the body." In case of a sword, the sword is different from the scabbard where it is kept. But the soul is identical to the body and is never seen outside it. This is the famous theory of Dehatmavada. That is, the body is the self. So the Charvakas are arguing that non-perception of the soul proves that the self and the body are one. Now, it must be noted that scientifically speaking, the Charvaka objections to the notion of a consciousness independent from the body holds true even today. No one has perceived an immaterial entity entering or leaving the body. Though people have apparently seen ghosts, they had not actually been scientifically verified. They are only seen to people already predisposed to believing such things. Near-death experiences have also apparently produced visions of one's own disembodied self. But the problem is that it can also be due to alterations of brain chemicals. After all, we do know people who take psychedelic drugs. They claim to have experienced a higher state of consciousness. And so finally, that the argument that all civilizations believe it, that is also the argument from popularity. And moreover, from the simple observations, we know that states of consciousness can be altered by physical substances like alcohol or drugs which would have been impossible if consciousness had not been rooted in the material. Now, the opponents of Carvakas gave many arguments that consciousness was not something material. But the Carvakas countered them by arguing their theory of how consciousness is formed. They argued that, as we have said before, is a combination of the various elements of the earth, water, fire, and air. But it cannot be any random mixture. They have to combine in a specific way in the body. Carvakas used examples from the natural world to buttress their argument. Snowballs are hard and solid, yet they originate in water, which is liquid and soft. Clearly, water undergoes a special transformation due to environmental factors, which changes its properties, giving rise to something new which was not present before. Similarly, certain things like kinnaseed has Madashakti, that is intoxicating power, though by themselves they are not intoxicating. But when they are mashed and fermented, they produce alcohol. Obviously, when objects like this mix together, combine together, they undergo a special transformation and produce liquor, which is intoxicating, even though such intoxicating effect had not been present in them earlier. So too, the elements, when they undergo a special kind of transformation in the form of a human body, produce consciousness. The material elements themselves are not required to have the property of awareness or self. Mere presence of the body also is not enough, since in that case, even the picture of a horse will be alive. The body itself can be non-sentient, but by virtue of a specific configuration, it becomes conscious. When death occurs, consciousness also departs, because due to disease or some other cause, the bodily configuration has lost its special kind of transformation which has created the consciousness. Thus, they once again become things without any consciousness. Thus, though sentience may not belong to any external things, it may belong to the combined elements transformed into the bodies. Now, so consciousness, therefore, is due to the immanent power within their natures, the Shabhava, from which arises its evolutes, happiness, etc., and also the various kind of sorrows. Thus, consciousness is nothing other than a property of material elements. Now, Carvaka argument that our awareness, our consciousness is a result of physical processes, have been validated by recent scientific discoveries. It is not as if consciousness is some solid thing. Nevertheless, it is a product of our brains. A living human body possesses cells called neurons, which communicate with each other through electrochemical impulses, which are distributed throughout the body, including the brain, in an organized pathway. Neurons are specialized in their functions. Sensory neurons respond to stimuli affecting the senses, then send signals to the spinal cord and brain. Motor neurons receive signals from the brain and cause muscle contractions. Interneurons connect neurons to other neurons within the same region of the brain. The cortex, or the outermost portion of the human brain, contains neural cells and axons, and they just convey chemical signals back and forth from the body. And it is all the neurons, the organized or nervous system is spread all over the body. And it is to the neurons that the brain unifies all experiences. to cognize the world and respond accordingly. It is comparable to the Charvaka description of special configuration of the body, which leads to emergence of consciousness, though consciousness is not present in matter. The nervous system develops slowly as the body develops. When a baby is born, it possesses sense organs to perceive sensory experiences and instincts hardwired in human genes to evolution. But the infant has no cognition of itself because the brain is underdeveloped. Thereafter, the brain develops under the stimulus from the environment. New synaptic connections are established and eliminated. If this development process is hampered by infection, trauma, or other noxious agents, the brain fails to develop properly and consciousness is ill-developed. The neurons thus control the physical body, but they are also responsible for the generation of thought and awareness of the world. Brain lesions, there are wounds in the brain. They can lead to vivid hallucinations, language impairment, disassociation from emotions, changes in the sense of personal identity, etc. Yet these neurons, they are also material objects, observable by instruments and affected by material stimulus like electricity. When all electrical activities within the brain cease and neural pathways collapse, then death occurs. There, the physical body continues to exist in its outward shape, but a vital change has taken place within it again, as the Charvakas postulated. Now, I think in the modern age, the state of coma is a good example of the body being alive, but consciousness is absent because the architecture of the brain has been disrupted. This can happen because of severe head injuries which disturb the structure, decrease of supply of materials like oxygen or glucose that is required by the brain to function, accumulation of toxic substances like drugs or ammonia that lead to neural dysfunction, changes in chemical levels or electrical seizures. So in a coma, brain activity is minimal, but the degree of coma and the level of consciousness thereby, it depends on the level of brain activity. The greater the damage to the brain, the deeper the coma. In a deep coma, the person simply has no sense of self or awareness, but the body is still there. So that becomes a kind of an example. The coma, the level of coma, it depends on how much the person's brain have been affected. Let me show you. This is the human brain anatomy. As you can see, the frontal lobe, there is the parietal lobe, cerebellum, and hippocampi. So, let me just, I have. So I think because these things have to be explained a bit, I do not think that many of us know about how the brain functions. If there is anyone, we can correct me if I get it wrong. The frontal lobe, that as you can see is the largest part of the brain. It is located in front of the head. And that is involved. We have found through experiments that is involved in personality characteristics, decision making, and movement. Recognition of smell also involves parts of the frontal lobe, and it also is responsible for speech ability. At the parietal lobe, it is the middle part of the brain. It helps the person identify objects and understand spatial relationships. That is where one's body is in relation with the other objects around us. It is also involved in interpreting pain and touch in the body. It houses an area which helps the brain understand the spoken language. So both the lobes together, they are responsible for much of our talking and our understanding what other people are saying. And the occipital lobe, but that is the back part of the brain, that is again involved with vision, what we see. And the temporal lobe. Now, temporal lobe is very interesting because they're involved in short-term memory, understanding musical rhythm, again, some amount of smell recognition and also speech. But you cannot ignore any part of the brain. They are all functioning together. But if one part is disrupted, the entire way you look at the world, your awareness of self also becomes disrupted. And then we have the cerebellum. It is at the back of the head, below the temporal and occipital lobes, and above the brainstem. Again, it has two hemispheres. That outer portion contains the neurons, while the inner area communicates with the cerebral cortex. Its function is to coordinate voluntary muscle movements and to maintain posture, balance, and equilibrium. There were new studies that have explored the cerebellum's roles in thought, emotion, and social behavior. And it is involved. But what I'm again focusing is that our awareness of ourselves, our consciousness, the very physical brain is very much involved in that. Now, today there are many experiments on it, and one is that has been popular had been with magnetic resonance imagery, because scientists routinely scan the brain with it to discover how the brain works and how it is affected by physical injuries and substances. Various experiments demonstrate that decision making, one of which, according to traditional thinking, accumulates karma, is taken by the neuronal cells linked with each other. For example, in one study of adolescents' neural responses, they were about risk making and how they respond in social context. The physical structure of the brain was scanned and mapped by activating various portions of the brain. Okay, this is the whole their conclusion, but put it in simple English. The brain imaging study was using the SCDT thing, and it showed that the brain is responding differently in risky situations and ambiguous situations when nothing is certain. The difference appeared even though in both types of situations, people were making decisions in a realistic setting where peers were present. In other words, when people make choices to social situations, the brain does not react in exactly the same way to risk and uncertainty. Again, people might say that, so what? We are free creatures, we are free to choose. But the point is that there is activity in the brain areas, which are considered to be connected with cognitive control, which include processes such as focusing, thinking carefully, and controlling one's actions. Earlier studies on decision making have also found this. But this study also suggests that these regions, brain regions related to emotions, social understanding, are also exist and becomes active. So the main point is that decision making in social setting is just not about your conscious thinking. It also involves emotional and social brain processes. And so the above example, you see, demonstrates it is concentrating specifically on one aspect of consciousness. But my point is that it demonstrates that physical structures are responsible for such a sense of self and social awareness. Moreover, modern scientific research also demonstrates that consciousness can be grasped and altered as it is within the body, and as Carvakas say, its existence agrees with the presence or absence of the special bodily configuration. A good example is the use of anesthesia. When anesthesia is applied, the patient loses consciousness completely. But whether an unity of consciousness is fragmented or simply disrupted for a moment and later reorganized is still a matter of research. But consciousness has been compared with a lamp which blows out when you become unconscious. But actually, it can be a matter of various lamps, all flickering together, and the light is there creating our consciousness. And it is not something that can be summoned in and out of existence. But when anesthesia is applied to the whole brain, you are no longer aware of being conscious. Such scientific findings are very objective as far as possible, and it agrees with the Carvakas theory. Okay, there is another study that the consciousness is they have applied this direct current stimulation in the brain to see what can be. So what is happening to the brain when you directly apply electric stimulus? So the study suggests that consciousness does not come from just one small part of the brain. Instead, it depends on both the front and back parts of the brain working together. Rather, in the research, the doctors used, as I have said, direct stimulation or the HDTDS on 46 patients whose consciousness are disordered. They cannot understand the world or themselves properly. They then compared with what happened when the stimulation was given to the frontal area of the brain and when it was given to the posterior area. The result shows different changes in brain activity and in the way information moves through the brain, depending on the place of stimulation. This means that consciousness is probably not controlled by one center in the brain. Both portions of the brain have to unite together, integrate together. The scientists were also testing that how to stimulate deep parts of the brain without surgery. So they found a new method that used electrical currents outside the head. The researchers focused specially on hippocampus, a deep brain area that is important for memory. And when they tested people by applying stimulation directly to this area, they found that it has improved episodic memory accurately in people who are healthy. Therefore, the brain obviously is a very important thing for creating consciousness. The Carvakas have argued that the self is nothing other than what exists within the body. And again, modern science proves that what we call consciousness, that again is actually exists within the body. But this is not to say that Carvakas gave us modern scientific discoveries. But what is important is this philosophy is founded in what we call the scientific temper. That is the spirit of inquiry and reform. Carvakas observed the world around them and analyzed it rationally, refusing to accept authority blindly. Now, such a scientific worldview naturally led them to question accepted social norms. They declared that customs like caste system and restricting women's independence and man-made have no efficacy. This naturally also brings in the vexed question of morality. Though they have argued that Dehoschida Moksha, that is, death is the only liberation, it does not necessarily mean, as we are usually taught, that they recommended just unabashed individualism and hedonism alone, without any thoughts of the moral. Carvakas did not seek to escape this world, but was very much engaged in it. Therefore, they advocated whatever occupations produce wealth and power and enables one to enjoy the good things of the world. Sarva Siddhanta Sangraha, which is an anthology of various philosophies, though sometimes more their summaries than actual quotations, they give a quote from apparently from Brihaspati Sutra that the wise should enjoy the pleasures of this world through proper visible means of agriculture, keeping cattle, trade, and political administration. But what is happening is that their religiousness does not preclude civil society or ethics, only anything that is supernatural, and that to them is not perceptible. So that what Carvakas can teach to the ordinary students in very simple terms, perception is the fundamental basis of knowledge. Demand evidence whenever views are presented, whether it is scientific knowledge, whether it is advertisement for anything, or whether it is a political opinion. Always question instead of blindly accepting what anyone tells you. The importance of rational public debate, that all truth claims and traditions must be open to critical scrutiny. And according to the National Education Policy, that IKS founded on experience, observation, experimentation, and rigorous analysis. This is what the Carvakas give us. I think that is all what I have to say. I think there is some time also left over, so any questions are welcome.